Okay, looks like we can start. Um, this is meeting number 6 of the EIPIP meetings, and unless anyone else wants to do it, I can do it today. Going once, going twice. Okay, so um, the first one is one we've been talking a lot about on the Telegram chat, which is migrating EIP content to a different Ethereum.org address. Sam made a proposal document. Um, So I think that's on Notion, right, Sam?
Correct. And I shared it with this Telegram group and the EIP Gitter channel. Happy to turn this into an issue on the respective GitHub repositories if that's easier. I think that'll be one of the things I'm looking for feedback on today.
Mm-hmm. Okay, sounds good. And that actually is the first agenda item. So if you want to take it up, we don't. I think our agenda's pretty light today. Yeah. So we can spend a good amount of time on this if you want to just walk us through it. And a lot of it we've already heard before, but some of it we haven't on the call is some of the proposed solution and the skepticism criticism section specifically. So I'll let you take it away, and then if people have questions along the way and discussion, we'll go through that.
Sure, sounds good. So good morning, everybody. If you guys weren't on the call 2 weeks ago, my name is Sam. I work as a web developer at the Ethereum Foundation, primarily on ethereum.org. So you can imagine how this idea popped into my head. Um, but what this proposal essentially is, um, it's really an effort to make the EIP content on the GitHub and EIP's subdomain just more discoverable and more accessible. So, what are ways that we can increase exposure and awareness from people inside and outside of the Ethereum ecosystem, and just educate them, get them engaged with the EIP process. So, this proposal isn't to change anything about the process itself. It's really just a change to the public website that would display these existing EIPs. Um, so I attached this proposal, or it's in the agenda. Um, we can walk through it in its entirety if people would like, um, or we could kind of leave it to asynchronous feedback. I encourage anyone who has input to go ahead and comment in this Notion document. It should be publicly accessible to comment. Um, but essentially, at a high level, what I tried to lay out was here's the problem statement, which hopefully everyone agrees upon as hey, it would be a beneficial thing to get more exposure and increase discoverability of this great content and these standards that the community has developed. From the people I've spoken to, within the EIP editing process and who have managed the repo in the past. It does seem like there just hasn't been much capacity to focus on this or making general improvements to the site. Um, so the opportunity I saw was how can we make that better? And I outlined some of the things we've tried up to this point, such as adding links from ethereum.org, doing some on-site optimization of the existing EIP site, um, and starting to build out additional content on ethereum.org that talks about EIPs and links to additional content there. So what this proposal essentially puts out there is hey, one option could be, if the main goal is to improve the search rankings of this EIP content, to actually migrate all that content from the existing subdomain to a subdirectory on ethereum.org. And I lay out some of the reasons like why I and some others think that would be beneficial, some of the risk we think involved, and some of like the skepticism we've received from a lot of folks in the community. Um, so at this point, yeah, I guess I'd just like open it up to questions if there are any. Otherwise, yeah, if we have time and people are interested, we can definitely dig into specific aspects of the proposal.
I have one thing or one question for the. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Um, in the problem section, I don't know if it's worth putting this explicitly or not. The site itself is also very difficult to discover EIPs within. So I see that you said that there is low bandwidth from EIPs to make improvements, but it doesn't. Um, it might be helpful to say there is a problem with the site that needs improving, and then the sub problem of that is that there aren't people working on it.
Mm,
Because I don't know how many people really like it's at the forefront of their mind that there isn't search functionality on the site. It's very hard to find a single EIP unless you have back information about where it would be beforehand. And then even then you have to scroll through the site all the way to the bottom to if it's in draft or active, and you have to know that in advance. There's not a way to navigate the EIPs easily from within the site itself.
got it. Yeah, just make a note of that. Yeah, and I think like with this problem statement and proposed solutions, like there's definitely alternative ways to try to address this. Which as of now, yeah, I haven't really outlined in the proposal, and I'd be happy to. Because to me, it's like two main pieces. James, you just touched on one is like, okay, maybe the existing like site interface and UI is suboptimal. And there's just general like UX improvements we could make to like make the EIP content easier to navigate, easier to comprehend and share or somehow engage with. And then the second main piece is just like the exposure of the content itself, um, primarily from an SEO standpoint. Like the keyword research I've done around EIPs and like Ethereum token standards, there's not a ton. And this is just using like, say, like Google AdWords keyword research tools to get an estimate of like overall impression volume. As you can imagine, there's really not a ton other than like the most popular EIPs, such as like ERC20 and the ERC 721 token standards. Um, but my hunch is that there is a decent amount of just like long tail search for specific EIPs that in aggregate like do make up a pretty significant amount of interest. Um, right now, the EIP's subdomain just doesn't seem to rank very well. Um, Google does tend to treat subdomains as like independent entities, which, as we've discussed, like can be good for certain things and bad for others. In my mind, it's like bad for SEO rankings, where we have this incredibly old and authoritative, powerful domain, ethereum.org, that we could leverage to help like give this content a boost in a sense of like having those pages on the site, being able to link to those internally, and index those as part of the main domain, I think could potentially like really boost this content in search results. So those are the two main things I think that we could potentially separate as like UX UI improvements to the site itself, and then just like improving exposure and awareness of the content primarily through like SEO benefits.
Great. I completely agree with that. Oh, James, did you have any other parts of your question or comment?
Another, I don't, this is, may or may not need to be included, but just so everybody on the call can hear this part, that the other problem is that the actual improvement of the EIP process is blocked by improvements to the site. And because there are changes we can't make unless someone makes changes on the interface that represents it. And so then some of those things are just hold there. Like I've made a proposal last year to do an inactive status, and then the feedback was, well, there's no one to make the the bot and the other things and the site render it. So then, oh well, so then it's just frustrating to hear from both sides that, well, we can't change it, but then also the proposals can't go through at the same time anyway.
Yeah, I agree with that heavily. I think that I'm starting to get really strong feelings that moving the site and with moving the site, improving the bot and the website are top priorities because, like you just mentioned, James, without doing that, we can't make iterative changes to EIP1 or the structure of the documents um, because they can't be updated on the site, and there's not search functionality and a few other things. So it's kind of like, yeah, it's exactly what you said. And I looked through the solution and the skepticism criticism, and I mean, if you look at it, really all we're doing is moving the EIP before ethereum.org and moving it after ethereum.org with the benefit of a lot of SEO and also, well, it's mainly the SEO I'm focused on because I think we do need more visibility for looking up EIPs on something like ethereum.org. And it's not a case of like trying to separate the two entities because we already have it eips.ethereum.org. And I think the only people who have these illusions of if it's a blank.ethereum.org being completely separate are people who are really in the ecosystem. And what this is for is for people in and outside of the ecosystem. So doing ethereum.org slash EIPs is not going to make a huge difference, I don't think, as far as like making it illegitimate. So I don't like that argument very much. Even if other sites like seem to tend away from that for standards, like very big professional standards sites. This is a blockchain standards site, and it's like Bitcoin's BIPs or Python's. It's like um, made after Bitcoin standards and Python standards, in which the Python URL is python.org/peps, I think. So all that to say, I think we should do it, and the only other thing would be, yeah, just going through each criticism, I guess. I can just do that real quick for my opinion on it. And then, Sam, just stop me if you have a different one. I think you've already written down yours, though.
Yeah,
Um,
one quick point I'd make, Hudson,
mhm.
just to James, your comment on like actual changes to the EIP process being blocked by the current EIP site is like, once again, this specific proposal at least like really isn't making any changes to like the process itself, or really even to like the the structure of the application itself. It would just be like to start mirroring one page to ethereum.org. So I think what I'm trying to say is like maybe those two things could be solved independently. Like if there is something about the current structure that's blocking changes to the EIP process, like we might be able to address that and try to solve that without this entire proposal. Or maybe it will make sense to change as part of this proposal. It would help me to understand like what the specific issues are about the current site that are blocking you. Um, but just to say that those changes may be able to be made in isolation.
I consider them more together. And the only
Mm.
reason for that is usually things aren't. Usually you can do things in isolation and it's good to separate. But the bot actually talks to, or I should say, the web server looks at the EIP's repo and does updates based on that. So the bot is, in a way, communicating with the web server, even though it's not bot to server, it's server to bot. When we do the new one, we're going to have to make sure that it's set up in the same way as the old bot. And while we're doing that, we might as well update the bot because it's going to be a waste of time it would be a waste of time overall to to change the bot to just literally all it do is go to ethereum.org/EIPs when then we're going to want to do more to the bot afterwards. Does that make sense?
I see.
It's better to do
Yeah,
the bot upgrades, not all of them, but like a set of one or two or three priorities, one of them being documentation, and then get a few people helping on it, and then move it over after a couple of those priorities are set so that we have something we can work with very fresh on the other side when we move it. So this also helps because this can kind of be an effort that combines two separate things into one, and that's a little stronger when we say this is relaunching the new EIPs and this is what we're changing and etc.
got it. Okay. Yeah, like at this point, I don't have a deep understanding of the bot and the inner workings of the application. So whenever
Yeah.
the time comes, probably just worth touching base with you and James to like get some specifics on that.
Yeah, let's have a separate call for sure and take notes. We might even stream it just so that people have an understanding of what we changed before and after for transparency reasons. And then William said, couldn't we just modify the existing subdomain? I'm not sure why we need a new domain specifically. If we just put in the work on the existing EIP subdomain, what wouldn't work? So I think you might have missed it while you were logged off, William, but it's the SEO. It's not returning as many hits, and I'm not an SEO guy. Sam is, so you can explain it better, Sam, if you want to, just in a few sentences.
Yeah, it's a good point and worth reiterating. And like what I tried to outline at the beginning is like what this proposal really tries to address is like two separate things. Is like one is like potential UI and UX improvements on the site. Number two is exposure of the content primarily through SEO. So, like for number two to happen to get the SEO benefits, from my understanding, and I've been out of like the hardcore SEO game for a couple of years now, but it was my career for a few different years, and I don't think it's changed too much. But I think to get to the SEO benefits, like we would need to migrate this content to the root domain. William, to your point, to get the like UI and UX and just like general site improvements, that does not require migrating this content at all. Like we could try to find a way to get resources allocated, either my time spent improving it or, funding Gitcoin bounties to get fixes to the site. Like it's not at all a requirement to do this migration to get those site improvements. I think one of the reasons I mentioned in my proposal as like a reason or like an additional benefit of migrating is that on ethereum.org we already have a lot of like functionality in place that we could leverage and essentially reuse, such as site search, so that we wouldn't have to re-implement it in a separate code base. We would just move the content onto ethereum.org, and then we would just get site search and like table of content features out of the box, if you will. It would definitely come with that upfront cost of like actually executing on this migration though.
Um, Echoing Hudson's thoughts, I see value keeping. Well, technically you could separate the things into developing the EIP subdomain and having a slash EIP. That it's much keeping them together makes a lot more sense to me, and mostly from like a resources and also like the people involved. If the people who are going to be making the changes should be able to do the changes where they want at the end of the day, because we're grateful that you guys are.
Yeah, and it's very intertwined, both the bot and the website migration. Or it's not so intertwined that it couldn't be done separately, but like I said earlier, it's a waste of time if it's done separately.
Yeah, agreed.
Oh, William said, in other words, subdomains have a harder time in SEO. Yeah, if it's blank.ethereum.org, that's worse than ethereum.org/blank.
Yeah, and an easy way of thinking about that is like, you know, the blogspot days are probably over. But if you do remember when like anyone could essentially spin up a subdomain on blogspot.com, like Google recognizes that distinct subdomains can be under control of distinct groups. So they tend to treat them as separate websites. Um, and the other piece is that just like the ethereum.org core domain itself just has massively more inbound links to it compared to the EIP subdomain.
So we don't have to spend the whole meeting on this, but I do want to give everyone else an opportunity to speak. Who else has opinions on this or comments?
Just a small one, but when I first started in this like 6 months ago, I was trying to learn my way around the EIPs and the SEO. It was really hard. So anything that would improve that, just in my view, would help.
Okay. So what I want as an action item, I want to work directly with Sam and James, but mostly with Sam. James only for um, the necessary explanations to Sam about how the bot updates stuff and the blockers we have. But before the next meeting, I want to get a new Notion document going, which is a plan, a proposed plan for what changes need to be made and a timeline of when to make them that's real rough that we can, change. Nothing official, but and then also like get some ideas early on about funding and um, just getting this done. Because if we get this done in the next couple months, while we're making decisions on the back end of how to change the EIP one and other stuff in there, then we can quickly just do all those changes. Um, we can quickly do all those changes later after the merge and the migration's done, or even right at the end at the same time, so that we have this huge package to present the community of here's what the updated EIPs that we or the updated EIP one plus the updated domain plus the updated bot plus the updated site. Bye, William. Oh, already left. So yeah, I think something like that would be really valuable, and maybe not all those things at once. Maybe it needs to be more iterative than I'm talking about. So we'll need help brainstorming, but put me as lead on that, and then I'll get help around me, whoever wants to attend those meetings and brainstorm with me, and get in maybe a separate Telegram chat. And yeah, so that's all I have about this topic. Any last words, Sam? That sounded threatening. Anyone else have a comment?
I guess one question I have is just like in terms of gathering additional community input, like would you recommend I open this up as an issue on the repo? Is there any other groups you'd recommend like sharing this proposal with?
Once we make so you have the proposal to do it. Once we make the proposal for how we're doing it, we can put both proposals in an issue and also elaborate on that issue on Twitter on the ethereum.org account and across some communities to like the all core devs getter and just say we're wanting to do this, or some of us are wanting to do this, and we've been talking a few meetings about this. Here are the notes. Here are the two proposals. We want feedback or opposition if there is any.
All right, that sounds good to me.
So yeah, anyone else?
For sure, have me do that call.
What was that again? You cut out.
For sure, add that the conversation with me, you, and Sam about the blockers for the process.
Okay, perfect. So next up, we have adding motivation to the meta EIP of an upgrade. Um, I don't know who that was.
This is in continuation to our last meeting, and at the end of the meeting, we were discussing that it was my proposal initially that we should be adding a motivation section in the meta eve of an upgrade. Initially, the thought process was the process that we follow every time for an upgrade is like kind of changing from past two of the upgrades. At least we have been seeing that the process keeps on changing, and I was looking for a a place to store this process that we used for a particular upgrade. The idea was like if we keep it updating on the EIP1, the next time the process change and we edit EIP1, the process for the last upgrade will get lost. So I was thinking if we can add it into the meta EIP of that particular upgrade, people can always find and this thing will be restored forever.
Do you mean the process of like the process for doing upgrades, or the specific process that was taken at that time? Like there's a standard that we're trying to follow, and then there's the what actually happened.
At that time I meant, like for example in Istanbul we did the schedule based upgrade. So with the process that we followed, it can be case study for people coming up in future and trying to understand how we did that thing. So my idea was to save the information about that. This time we are doing like we are including EFI into the process and doing an EIP centric. So I was hoping to have this mentioned at least in the meta e for Berlin, so that people should know that this is the particular process that we uh, followed for Berlin. Or maybe if we are not changing it in any further upgrade, it's fine. It can be moved to EIP1. But if we are changing some other upgrade process for next upgrade, it should be mentioned in the next meta e.
And the reason for having that is for people to learn from the process, or what does that add for you to?
uh, I was thinking that at this point of time, we are doing a lot of experiment. So there may be a point when we would like to analyze all these data and see which one was the most successful upgrade for us or the process for the upgrade that we should be following. So if we have this kind of data available to get analyzed at one point of time, that would be helpful. But if we keep on losing it, it will be difficult to collect back.
Um, I think it's a great idea to collect that data, that historical perspective, so that we can improve upon it. I'm skeptical if it should be in EIP1 in any capacity, because what EIP1 is the purpose of EIP1, in my opinion, and how it's kind of been described in the README, is if you are someone who wants to make a change to Ethereum and you want a succinct guide on how to do that, what the different types are, what you have to do to accomplish that, and who reviews them, you go to EIP1. If we start putting stuff about hard forks in there specifically, I think that would be make it bulkier. It would also detract from the purpose of the EIP1, which is just for people who are writing EIPs. Because if you're writing an EIP, you don't care how core EIPs are um, processed. I think it's a good idea to have it in the meta EIP potentially, but that also introduces some opinion and non technical material. So, those are my two comments so far.
Basically, this motivation section is available in almost every EIP. Only it is basic in the meta EIP. So I understand if people have like the reservation with the word motivation, because it is actually not the motivation, but as the process that we are trying to document in that, which is actually the non-technical part of it. But for the sake of history, we can have it, and I don't see any downside of that having it in there. If we would like to change the term, because motivation is a term which is there in almost every EIP. I'm okay with that.
Um, I see one downside from including it, but as far as having the information available for people who are trying to study the EIP process or improve it, it would be a little bit more digging, but there's plenty of blog posts and things that are available about around the time of the fork that would have even more meta information about the decision process. So if in my mind, if someone is trying to figure that out, it would take a little bit more digging, but the information is available for them to find it, even if it isn't on the meta, even if it isn't in the motivational section. And
I,
Yeah.
yeah.
One
yeah,
thing that I think is a bit odd about the motivation for the meta EIP is the motivation is basically the list of EIPs that are included in the hard fork, right? It's like we're saying, why do you have this upgrade? Well, to implement these things that are listed here. And you can't really have a why that's like more elaborate than that, because then people will start disagreeing on it, and it just becomes like a place for like political, argumentation. So I don't know. I agree. It's odd that they're like a bit different, but I think the cost of making them similar is high, and I'm not sure what the value is. Um, Especially because most of these things are just like technical upgrades, right? We look at the Berlin. It's like the motivation is to add the BLS 12381 precompile. I mean, I don't know. It feels odd to like add a motivation for that.
I get the idea of that using the term motivation over there. That's why I mentioned that if we would want to use it with the term of process or something, maybe like my basic concern here was like we would want to save the information about the process, because the last time what we did for Istanbul, I saw a lot of effort in James' Excel sheet and the process that we followed. It was schedule based at what time, how many weeks were required for this and that. It was everything was there, but we can't see. Of course, if we keep on digging on that, we will be able to find it somewhere or the other. But I thought it would be a good idea to keep it somewhere in the meta e, maybe with a different heading, if motivation is contradicting the thought of it.
I
Go ahead, James.
I would say even with a different heading, there's a coordination cost to having that information there, and that is that it would be great if everything that's on the EIP repo agrees and shows the current understanding of what we're doing for the process. And if we have certain pieces showing historical information about what did happen, it is like a place for people to disagree about what is or shouldn't happen, and pointing to say like, oh well, for this last one we did this, and then but really anyone who is talking about the process should be pointing at the current process, and so having only that information be the one that's easy to find, I think will help with that kind of fragmentation of narrative.
I think that um, I think we need this data somewhere, which is exactly what Pooja's talking about. I think it needs to be somewhere because I don't want people to have to go digging for it, especially as times change and as we improve, and we have to re-explain to people over and over again. But I almost feel like postmortems that the cat herders write might be a better location, and might be something that people can turn to and say, "Oh, this is an opinion piece by the cat herders," rather than this is something. Because I mean, we try to keep non-technical and opinion out of the EIPs except for EIP 1. So EIPs should be technical documents with technical motivation, implementation, security considerations, etc. And meta EIPs were created by Alex Bergzazi to document what went into a hard fork, at what block, and which EIPs went in, and not to make it too complicated. So I think that's the main concern, is that it would, or the main concerns, I should say, is that it would complicate it and impose, like James said, something that could be disagreed on by opinion. But we do need to put it somewhere. So I'm thinking maybe somewhere else. But
I have
Pooja, go ahead.
um I just had an idea for a place, a having an informational EIP that is a postmortem on hard forks.
Yeah, sounds good. That can be a place. Like it should be related to that particular upgrade. If not meta, postmortem could be a good place, because these are the key documents that would be referred when people would try to analyze these data.
So in doing that, we might need to further specify what an informational EIP is, because I don't know if it completely, well, because an informational EIP, according to EIP 1, is more of like, it's a guideline, or, well, it does say information. I thought it would say announcement. So yeah, it would fit in an informational EIP.
Okay.
Yeah, that sounds good. We can put it in there. Anybody else have comments?
So
And I'd be fine to go backwards and do one on Muir Glacier with you, Pooja.
yeah, yeah, I was about to email you for that. So I have one more question here before we move on. So the process that we are currently, like following here for the EFI and the EIP centric. So uh, where we are getting at. Should we go ahead and add that to in EIP1, or should that be documented as an informational EIP somewhere for this Berlin?
That's a hard question. I don't have an answer.
Because this is exactly what I'm trying to achieve here, is like, a proper place for documenting the process. Istanbul is past, so if we will add it in the postmortem of that, that is quite good, quite okay. But Berlin is coming up, and we may be seeing more future upgrades, so we should have a a decided place. I'm okay with keeping it anywhere, but that should be the place where we can refer people to go ahead and check what we did.
There are two paths I can see us taking on this. The current, because there's a lot of rules that are involved in, or there's beginning to be a lot of rules. What it used to be is you take it to the core devs, they decide it's going in, and then we have that complicated non-documented process. Now it's we have EFI and we have champions with specific edicts, and we have the core devs deal with this stuff and not this other stuff. They deal with technical and not political, and we're working on that problem too. And putting that all on EIP1, I'm always just trying to. I have this like protection of EIP1 to not make it too much information so that people are turned off to the process, or too much information so that people, most people who read an EIP are going to be reading it for ERCs, because we really get stuck in this core EIP stuff, but really most EIPs are ERCs.
Well,
So
maybe the informational EIP makes sense, right? Which you just link back in EIP1, where you say in EIP1, like here's the process for the core EIPs, and you link to that informational EIP that describes the EIP-centric process.
that's a good idea.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
I'm a little bit I'm not like staunch on this. The and I know I don't have the vision of VIP1 totally. But I've liked the idea of expanding it and making it more usable, like adding it be the single source of truth for the Ethereum governance in general and all of those things. And you're right in that I am way too much in the core EIP, so then I overdo that stuff. I wish there was someone out there that was kind of doing the same thing, but for ERC, so we don't exactly have that at the moment. But if we, like, I added in that table of contents, and I think there's ways of expanding it, even if it got large, that it could be quickly navigatable for people. I just start to worry that my worry comes in like two forms. One is finding the right information at the right time can be difficult for people. So having it, to get the information for this, you actually have to go over there and have them go over there. If it's linked into EIP1, that kind of mitigates that a bit, but it still is a little bit harder to find. And then the other one is decision-making processes around things like the hard fork stuff or EFI. Like, should we have the same process for changing the EIP centric model be the same process for changing EIP1?
That last question, we need to figure out how to change EIP1 before it can be answered. The rest of your question statements, I would say it works to be in an informational EIP that's set to active status, because EIP1 does say that some informational and process EIPs, such as EIP1, may be in active status, so they're never meant to be completed. So we would literally have it be EIP and then whatever number is the one for how champions and EFI and whatever we call that umbrella process is, um, for core developer decisions and in a core dev meeting, etc. Can be that EIP, and it can keep that number forever. And if we change it, we just do a pull request and get consensus on the pull request, which we could do easily with the core devs who agree with the process, and then it gets changed. So it can change as many times or as often as it needs to be.
And then I guess if we made an EFI informational EIP, and then I was an author on it, then pretty much I can write it.
Yeah.
I don't know, like, if that's the goal or not the goal.
Which is the goal?
Oh, because if I was an author on a meta EIP that described the semi-official EFI process and how all that works, and I have like the capacity to do that all on my own. And I don't know if that it becomes a increase in decentralizing the information as a part of the community, or
If it's a meta, maybe, but this would be informational. So it doesn't have to be followed, but it's something to put down.
okay.
And in this case, if you're writing it, you're the best person to write it as a hard fork manager. So it's not a, it's, I mean, once we have it in last call, and anyone can come in and have objections and make changes and discuss with you. But just the reality is we can't overly focus on the centralization or decentralization aspect, because at the end of the day, if no one's going to argue with you, no one's going to argue with you, and so we don't need to be taking steps to force something into the process. We need to give every opportunity for people to do that, but we don't need to like openly solicit it hardcore.
Okay. And then once it's an active status, then I sort of can just update it, and then
You would have to do a PR that would have to go through last call. Is
okay. So then we would want to specify something like that, because currently that wouldn't be there isn't a way to do what you just said.
Exactly, there isn't a way to upgrade. There isn't a way spoken to upgrade active EIPs, not an EIP1. So how, like, and this is going to get confusing wording, there is not a way to upgrade active EIPs such as EIP1. So the way to upgrade EIP1 is specifically set on precedence alone and not on a process that's recorded. And the precedence for upgrading EIP1 or other active EIPs, of which EIP1 is the only active EIP, is to do pull request for that EIP and have it go to last call and have people agree on it. I can
That was
make that
very
into a
well.
wrap.
That was very well said, actually, and articulated.
Yeah.
There isn't a way to make a pull request be last call.
Yeah.
Oh, there isn't?
On that, I actually created an EIP to document a possible process for updating active EIPs. I think about in December. I can link that below.
Oh,
and
please do.
send that.
Yeah. We can definitely use that.
And this actually goes into a piece of something I wanted to talk about today. So maybe we could.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Edson, go ahead.
So the idea was we already have a process for putting things into last call. So the proposal was any change would be made into its own EIP, which would then go through the EIP process. And once it's accepted, then that change can be put into the active EIP it's referencing. So that's the simplified version of it.
I would argue for a simpler version.
Yeah.
No, you're on the right track. I would do it just a little bit differently, and this is something I've been thinking about, wanting to talk about today. So, as far as editing active EIPs, including EIP1, getting public feedback and making sure any changes are known by the community, which currently has been the last call RSS feed. But I think it would be useful. I wanted to ask the group here if we had some kind of communication channel, whether it be like a Twitter bot or an RSS feed for specifically of changes to active EIPs, that then has its own subscription list for last call for them, something like that.
Why would it only need to be for active EIPs?
Because there's a little bit of, like, if we made an EIP to update if we made an EIP to change EIP1 every time on everything, I think that is way too much more overhead, and there's a certain loyalty to process that happens among people that I've seen in the ETC community, where they're arguing something, but from without actually arguing the change itself, but arguing the process of the change. And then that just spiraled into its own weirdness. So I would changes to active EIPs, and I like this, including the EIP centric model as an active EIP as part of that same group. That those changes, if I was to change the definition for what it means to be EFI, I don't think I should make an EIP to make that edit. But I do think that the community should be aware of that edit and be able to respond as kind of a last call thing.
Yes, so you don't need to make an EIP for that edit. You do need to make a pull request for that edit to upgrade the active EIP, and that last call should go into some kind of Twitter bot or something like that. That's what you're proposing?
Yeah, some Twitter bot or RSS feed, because right now you can't make the only way to trigger the RSS feed is for the status of an EIP to go into last call, which if I made a pull request that wasn't adding an EIP, it was editing one of these active EIPs, it wouldn't have that. So then I can't trigger the RSS feed.
No, you could. You would just change the status from active to last call, and then it would go back to active after it's either confirmed or denied that the new changes are going in. That would still trigger the RSS feed, and it wouldn't decouple any other last calls from active, because that would complicate things, in my opinion.
You wouldn't. You'd have to accept the pull request to trigger the bot.
Yeah, you'd have to accept the last call status, yes.
So then I would make a PR that makes it last call, and then make a PR that makes edits on that.
That's how it works with ERCs currently, yes. However, the discussion all happens in magician's forms, hopefully.
So then I want to make sure I understand this part. So I would make a PR to EIP1 that makes no changes but moves it to last call.
No, no. You would have so how it works in an ERC, which would be similar to an active EIP, is you have a PR that initially puts your data out there, your EIP, and it's in draft mode as long as it's well formed. Then you have a last call status, so it goes from draft to last call and then to final. And then from there, unless you're changing a spelling error, it's superseded after that if you want to supersede it. So that's how an ERC would work. For an active EIP, it's actually less steps because the first step for making it at all is to make it a draft and then active. Or no, draft, last call, then active. And then if you want to do changes to it, you would do last call if it's approved and then active again.
That you couldn't trigger last call without it being approved, without merging the EIP.
Yeah, you would merge it with the header file just saying last call instead of active. So then the EIP would be reflected as in a last call status, which is helpful for people visiting that EIP out of the blue to say, oh, this is changing soon. Or not changing.
But then the changes, so then I would need to have a PR that changes it to last call, but doesn't have the contents of the change. But then have a PR that had contents of the change.
Yep, exactly. The PR with the contents of the change would be the one that goes to active again.
Okay. I guess that's a little kind of confusing.
Yeah, we should make it. Number one, we should make a graph for the current process, and number two, we should change it maybe.
Yeah, and I like the idea of like a Twitter bot or something, or adding in. I don't know. It makes sense that this has its own process and its own subscription feed.
Cool. We spent way too much time on this. We should time box.
Yep.
I don't know if there's anything else on that. We'll need to take a lot of that offline or in the Telegram. So we only have a few minutes left, but update on proposed changes to EIP1. I think we can skip that because we've been going over that off and on today. and we'll need to recollect our thoughts and go through the notes and kind of list them out before we talk about them again. Survey on the EIP process. That is, oh, we already have a form. Cool. For some reason, oh, we made this before. I remember this now. Has anyone replied to that, or have we not sent it out? I forgot where we were on that.
So we haven't sent it out yet. I think Tim posted it in the cat herders bi-weekly newsletter.
Yeah, we did add it in the bi-weekly newsletter this week, but since it is with you, so I have no visibility if we received any response to that or not.
There hasn't actually been a response yet, but I linked the latest form. If you guys could give it the final okay, we can start sending it out.
I like how simple it is. I would say that we need something so that if people, so at the very top, we need to talk about the EIPIP process and say this is where you can go for more info, and it's happening right now. Because as many opportunities as we can take to say join us, we need to do that, because otherwise there's going to be this implicit just stigma around, oh, you did this without the community and all this other stuff. That can very easily happen if we don't push this everywhere.
All right, sounds good. I think that links don't show up in the description, but
you can put the URL since it's real short.
Yeah, all right.
Would it be a good idea to share it in the all core dev call, because that is watched by most of the people and most of the developers are there, so we can share them and ask them to give their feedback.
Yeah, we can do that.
Sounds good. Any other final thoughts? Final comments on the forum?
I like how simple it is. We might do follow-up forms with people leaving their contact information. If we need more specifics, I should say. We might not.
Sounds good.
Review the action items from EIP Meeting 5. I forgot where action items are. Are they at the bottom, or was it just...
No, actually, that was supposed to be here only in the summary section. But in the last meeting, we discussed about two major topics. That was one, migration of EIP content that we actually covered. And the second was the motivation. So I don't think we do have much action item over there from the last meeting.
Okay, we'll have some for this time. So I think, oh, you're taking notes. Just put it as action items. And then also, if we have any left off from EIP Meeting 3, re-add those, please.
Of course, I will do that.
Okay. Any other final business?
Yeah, just if we got a sec, just one question for Sam Richards. Thanks for putting together that, what was it, a Notion.so summary of your proposal? Because it was hard to read through that whole conversation, and it was nice to see that summary. But and I noticed somewhere you were asking for comment. If I want to say, yeah, I'm for this, can I add that as a comment somewhere, or is there anything like?
Yeah, so you should have the ability in the Notion document to essentially, like, if you highlight any piece of text, you should be able to input a comment.
Oh, that's how you do that.
Let me know if you have issues, though. I know, like, the tool fatigue of another new documentation tool. I personally like Notion. But again, yeah, happy to change the format. And it sounds like once we do have a more firm, like, how-to implementation strategy, we do plan to open it up as a GitHub issue in the EIP repo. And that should be like a friendly and familiar place for people to add input.
Okay, cool, thanks. Yeah, and just a plug for Canonizer here. If you want us to help, because if you put something like this in Canonizer, then everyone who supports that could, like, it's like a petition. People can sign it, and there's also a place for people with a different point of view can create a competing camp and sign that, so you can keep track of that and what they want and what's required to get them on board, and track when they jump camp and get on board and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, I'll shut up now. Thanks.
Right on. I'll check that out.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Okay, sounds good. And I see there's been some color changes on here. So, yeah. I think that's about it. Thanks, everyone. We'll meet again in 2 weeks.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Hudson.
Cheers.
Uh,